Alan's going to do most of the talking.
Good
so
morning.
He's got. But welcome everybody, especially all our visitors. And if you'll bear with me for a minute, we'll open with a quick word of prayer, and then I'll introduce our speaker. Heavenly Father, we are truly grateful to be able to gather in your name to study some words that, though not straight from Scripture, certainly direct us in how you would want us to live. We ask that you bless our time together and send us out as better people and giving people, much like Theo. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. Well, good morning. This is one of my dear friends, Allen Levi. Allen started out as a lawyer and then got a degree at first at Georgia in English and law, and then practiced law for a few years, went to Scotland and got a degree in Scottish fiction. Lived in Edinburgh for 2 years, which I was jealous of being a golfer. After a few years of law practice, he worked full-time for Young Life as an independent singer-songwriter, and that's where I met Allen at family camp in Windy Gap. And now he's become an author, and he actually has 3 books. He has a children's book, Olivia Town, and then a wonderful, wonderful book about the journey with his brother Gary, who died of a brain tumor and lived with Allen the last year of his life, The Last Sweet Mile. I recommend it highly. Before you read it, Brandy can vouch for it, you go to Costco and you get that case of Kleenex. You're going to need every one of them. But now he's written his first novel, Theo of Golden. Disclaimer, I hope everybody has read it because we're probably going to talk about the end of it today. But with that, I'll let Allen give a few introductory remarks, and then we have some questions to ask him about the book.
Thank you. Well, first of all, good morning. And thank you. One of the pleasant surprises of this first novel that I've written is that some of the people who have read it have invited me to come to their book club or their civic organization or literary society to do something like we're doing this morning. So much so that my niece who works for me has to kind of thin out the invitations. This almost sounds like boasting, but she said when I talked to her yesterday that on Monday of this past week, she declined 40 new invitations. We get about 20 a week. And so whenever she and I are trying to figure out which ones to accept, she includes me in that deliberation. And we got this invitation, and I said, let's take that one. And she said, well, why that one? And she said, you've got this one in ABC. And I said, well, Gwen and David. These are old friends of mine. I don't ever get to see them. They are mentors for me in how to live life well. And I knew that it would be a joy to be in their home with them, which it has been, and to meet some of you in the process. So you are very blessed to have one another. You're blessed to have my good friend David and Gwen in your midst. But I am very honored that you invited me to be here this morning. I will have to confess to you that it feels a little pretentious as somebody who has just written one novel and who did that without the benefit of an editor or a coach or anyone of that sort to help me, to sit here and answer questions as if I have much to offer in the way of being a novelist. But I'm happy to answer questions. And I hope more than anything else that if you're a creative sort and you think you might have some inclination to write, you might be encouraged. I was reading in the book of Acts this last week. There is a moment when Paul is leaving some of his dear friends in a particular locality, and he says that at the time of departure of these people, he has been encouraged, he has been gladdened, and he has been strengthened. And I have no doubt that when I leave here today, I will be able to say the same. So thank you for letting me be with you today. I'm honored.
We're giddy having you here.
Thank you.
I'm famous now because I know a famous best-selling author. It's my claim to fame at the age of 72. All right, so we got questions submitted by people that read the books. And oddly enough, probably 10 or 15 people sent me 5 questions, and they were all the same 5 questions. So anyway, so when writing the book, what were your inspirations? How long was the novel in your head before you started writing it? And how long did it take you to write it?
Yeah, great question. So how much of the story was in my head when I began? This much. Some of you might know the story. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. I live in a little town now called Hamilton, just north of Columbus. Hamilton might be 1,000 souls, and I live 3 miles away from the town center. But I grew up in Columbus. That's where I practiced law for 13 years. I still have significant friendships and contacts there. There's a coffee shop in downtown Columbus that I'm very fond of. And one day I was waiting for a coffee order there, and there are 92 or 94 portraits on the wall, all done by a dear friend of mine. And to me, they are exquisite. Gary Pound, the artist, and I have done a children's book together. We've collaborated on other projects. But I was looking at all of these portraits, and I know a lot of the people in the portraits. And I wondered, why don't they or someone who loves them buy this portrait? They're very modestly priced. They're beautiful. They would be a nice addition to any home. And that's when the idea came to me, wouldn't it be fun to buy them all myself and just find the people and give them back to them? Like if I saw one of Harry, I would say, I'm going to buy that one. I'm going to find him. I'm going to give it to him with a little bit of ceremony to it. So I bought 5 of the portraits and took them home with me. I didn't know any of the people in these particular 5, but the seed corn for a story developed when I had that idea. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to write a story about a stranger who comes to a town, buys the portraits, and begins the bestowals of those items to their rightful owners. And I have heard authors say in the past that the way that you write a piece of fiction is you just sit down and start writing, just put words on paper and something bubbles up. And so I thought, well, they know what they're doing and I've never done this, so I'm going to try to write a novel. Not that I've always aspired to do that. I've been a songwriter for a long time. And of course, a song is something that can be completed pretty quickly. You're asking very, very small commitments from an audience when you write a song. You're basically saying, give me 4 minutes of your life, and would you please listen to this song? A novel is a lot different because you're asking for hours and hours of someone's reading time. But I have had in the back of my mind a story idea for decades. And I thought this might be a good chance just to exercise the writing muscle, see if I have the discipline, the stamina, the desire to actually write a long piece of fiction. And so I started writing. Nothing bubbled to the surface. It wasn't working for me that way, but I kept writing, and then I would quit for a few months. I would pick it up again. And during COVID, when we all had time to do things that we had not had time for previously, I took writing a bit more seriously, and I finished it. I got to the point that I knew I was kind of rounding the bend on what could be a completed piece of fiction, and I finished the book, I put it in a drawer, and I said, mission accomplished. But I've got 5 friends that I meet with every year for a long weekend. These are old college friends, and they knew that I was attempting to write a book, and they asked me in one of our November meetings, how's the book coming? And I said, well, I finished, I'm done. And they said, well, what are you doing with it? I said, well, it's in that drawer. I'm done. And they said, well, we'd like to read it. And so I let them read it, and they said, we think you should do something with it. I had no intentions of publishing the book. And anyway, because I trust their judgment more than my own, I pulled the manuscript out, worked on it a good bit more to just clean it up a bit. And that's the book that a number of you have read. It's the fault of those 5 friends of mine. You might notice that I did no credits in the book. A lot of times you're reading at the back of the book, you thank everybody in the world who's helped you. And there were obviously people to thank, but I honestly did not think anybody would want their name in the book. That was my confidence level about what I had put out into the world. So I didn't have any credits in the book except in the very front to my friend Cubby Culbertson up in Columbia, South Carolina. But he bought 100 books. And it was kind of interesting because I did want to dedicate the book just because that seems pro forma. That's what you're supposed to do. But I also wanted, when I did that, to give the readers, who obviously would know nothing about me as an author because I wasn't one, I wanted them to know that you can enter this text with a sense of lightness. And so y'all might remember the dedication to Cubby Culbertson, something like, with thanks for a long friendship and as a reminder, just between the two of us, that you promised to purchase 100 copies of this book if I dedicated it to you. And so I called Cubby and I said, look, this is kind of a joke. It's tongue in cheek, but I want people to enter this with a good humor. Not that the story is humorous, but I wanted them to know there is a lightness to this story. So Cubby bought 100, but it's interesting. He said, just send me 1 copy of the book this is his direction to my niece who works for me, and find 99 book clubs in America and send one copy of the book to 99 book clubs. And when you have a marketing budget of 0 and you do not have an agent or a publisher and you have no experience in the book world, that has proven to be a really invaluable suggestion that Cubby had for us. But the book, all total, probably took 3 or 4 years off and on. I think if I had written it, straight through, it may have taken a year and a half. I discovered in the process of all the jobs I've had, and I've had a number, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. In some ways, by the time I finished, I felt slightly rewarded, but the fact that folks have read the book and given it good marks has just been over the moon for me. So I owe a deep debt of gratitude to all of you. But I think that's the answer.
We may get back to that, your reaction to the book. All right, so the themes were in the book, if you read it early: attentiveness, presence, and incarnation, sadness, gladness and playfulness, beauty and change. Were all those themes in your mind when you started writing the book, or did they develop as you were writing it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, again, there was nothing in my mind when I started writing. There really wasn't. And I think that once I settled on the character of the old man, he drove everything going forward. People have asked me, maybe this is a question in your list there, David, did I have someone in mind as I created the different characters in the book? And the answer is no, until I started writing the characters. And then I saw they bore strong resemblance to people who I know some very well. Theo reminds me of my brother Gary, who was 13 months younger than me. He was maybe the most wonderful person I've ever known in life. Like myself, he was a never married guy, loved Christ fiercely. He was a real bullheaded kind of guy, but he loved life, loved people, loved having people together. He loved community. For most of his last 20 years, he lived overseas. The last 5 years were in Afghanistan doing ministry there. But the Theo character reminded me a lot of Gary. But as far as themes of the book, I had nothing in mind. But obviously, if the premise of the book was that this strange man was going to come to a town and make anonymous gifts to people, generosity was obviously going to be a theme of the story. And then as I started fleshing out the early scenes, I wanted to create the character that I hope I can become in life. And I think one of the distinctions between nonfiction and fiction, nonfiction, of course, deals with facts. Fiction, it can also include facts, of course, but it deals with possibility. And what I wanted to do was create a character who would take the unlikely and make it believable. It's unlikely that somebody would do what this old man did, but why not? I mean, it's credible to me that there are souls like that in the world. And so as I started developing him as a character, then all of these attributes, attentiveness, curiosity, generosity, graciousness, all of that it kind of got folded into that one life. And again, it might seem unlikely, but my guess is that in this room, there are people who are very Theo-esque. Maybe people completely Theo-esque. I look at my friend Jerry there. I think of the Freemans. I look at my friend Amber. I look at so many of you that I met last night. And I'm sure that there is the heart of a Theo in all of us. That's what it means to be made in the image of God. And words like holiness and righteousness, those words have all kinds of baggage to them. But at its core, to me, take all of these attributes, attentiveness, love for beauty, generosity, charity, roll it into one word, and the word is holy. Theo was a wonderfully, deeply, enticingly holy man. So the themes kind of were driven by the character more than the characters by any themes that I had in mind at the time. Did y'all have any other themes or any words that popped into mind as you look back at the book or the text, other than the ones that tell me those again? Come on.
You wrote the book. Attentiveness, presence, and incarnation were one.
Yeah.
Sadness, gladness and playfulness, beauty and change.
Yeah.
And certainly there's a lot of change in a lot of the characters in the book.
Right. So the word incarnation to me has taken on loaded significance in the last few years. I think that for me, the lesson learned from the COVID season in our world is the word incarnation. Because I think we almost bought into, maybe we did buy into the myth, the deception that we can live virtually with one another. And we can't. Jesus came, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, I think, to make a statement that the only way we can live life authentically is when we are close enough to touch the person next to us. Think of all the times that Jesus used his hands. It's one of the most illuminative studies I've ever done of the Gospels. Just look at every occasion when Jesus used his hands to touch people. The blind guy, the dead man in the coffin, feeding the people, feeding his disciples fish for breakfast after the resurrection. All of the things that Jesus did with his hands, to me, underscore the importance of incarnation in life. And the thought that we can pick up a screen and somehow live life deeply and authentically just by that means is a dangerous inclination on our part. So incarnation, which became pretty important to me during the COVID season, I think just embedded itself into the text because I was thinking about that a lot. The one theme that I've gotten the strongest response to, maybe surprisingly, maybe not, is the one about sadness. And that was an 11th hour and 59th minute addition to the story. I had finished the book pretty much, and we were probably 2 or 3 days from sending it to press. And I added 2 scenes. One was the one at the very end about Ellen's daughter coming back, Willa. You will see her again. And the other was the chapter on sadness. And I just wanted to make sure that Theo was a well-rounded person, a credible character. And how can any of us live for 80 plus years and not have encountered enormous amounts of sadness in our life? And so I've had a lot of people who have either been through or were going through difficult seasons of life. And they said, I felt like those words gave me permission to own my sadness, because we live in a world that encourages us to be happy, clappy, virally joyful all the time. And we know that's not the way that life works. Jesus was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. We had a conversation one Thursday morning. Gwen, this is the kind of thing that we discuss on Thursday in my men's group. There's a group of fellows, we've been meeting 25 years on my front porch. It's anywhere from 25 to 40 guys every week. We got together originally to pray for our high school, but we studied the scriptures together. And one morning the question was asked, is it possible to grow old or grow older without also growing sadder at the same time? Now, most of the guys on the porch, I'm 69, are my age and up. We've got a handful that are younger. And we've grown old together, or older, in the last 25 years. And we had a pretty spirited conversation about it. But I think the consensus by the end of the discussion was, you can't live in this life without getting sadder and sadder, because the brokenness of the world becomes so undeniable, and we see so much of it. The paradox, of course, is that at the same time, the joy of Christ, the hope of Christ, also deepens in our experience. But Theo, as a well-rounded character, knew his share of sadness. We know his story from reading the text. But I was very gratified, have been gratified, that people took from that permission to own the hurt and the sadness in life. Who could live through Hurricane Helene in Augusta, Georgia, and not be saddened by what you have endured? Who can live through the turmoil of the last decade and not just be broken with the meanness that is in our world? The brokenness that Jesus walked right into the middle of because he knew we needed rescue. But I think before we ever get to the rescue part, we have to own our sadness. We have to own the brokenness, the hurt. And so I'm really happy that the Spirit of God, dare I say, inspired that little section of the book. So that theme of sadness.
One of my favorite quotes is, it's a good sadness.
Yeah.
That it changes something in you, change being the theme.
Right.
And it makes you a better person eventually.
Right.
All right, I'm going to embarrass somebody, but I don't know the name, so I can't embarrass them. So one of the questions we got was, Theo is from Portugal. Why Portugal? why not somewhere like Norway? And
Norway is good.
how much research did you do, not only on Portugal, but other places and events in the book?
Yeah, so
And you're going to tell the story about going to Portugal.
of course I will. That was a very deliberate choice. It was a tax deduction, yes. Thank you. Thank you. I think the next book is going to be a European tour.
All tax deductible.
All tax deductible, thank you. So I knew that Theo was going to be an artist. And I was thinking, where does this artist originate from? And so I was thinking, if I make him a French citizen, that might be too easy for somebody to figure out, because a lot of famous artists are from France or Holland or even Germany, Spain. But I was thinking, do you know a single memorable artist from Portugal? If you do, you're a lot smarter than I am. And I did a little bit of research, and there really aren't many, if any. So I thought Portugal is going to be the home of Theo. I know nothing about Portugal. I've never read anything by Portuguese authors. And so I called a nephew of mine and I said, hey, would you like to be my travel assistant, my research assistant? And we will go to Portugal and spend a couple of weeks. And so we got on the plane, went to Portugal with no agenda. We had a little room in Lisbon for a couple of nights. And then we just kind of started touring the country, get on a train and get off where we end up. We did spend a good bit of time in Porto up in the north, which is where the Douro River is. And that's where I felt like I found the little boy Theo, and did a good bit of writing while I was there. But that's the reason for Portugal. And it was a tax deductible trip.
Well, if you need a pediatrician, go to Europe or France with you for the next book. I'm ready.
Yes, wasn't that good? So I'd never drank port before, but the first night that we got to Lisbon, and apparently in all of the rooms of this little bed and breakfast, they had a bottle of port. And so my nephew David and I opened it, and I loved it. And so pretty much every day after that, we drank some port. And when we got up to the north, where the Douro River is, where all the port in the world comes from, I went to all of the port cellars, took copious notes, bought some books, read about it, was fascinated by it as a metaphor for so much in life. And I tried to capture that in the story of port. But ever since then, I kind of keep a bottle or two very close at hand for a little morning nip to begin my writing day, and a celebratory nip at the end of the day.
All right, this question comes from Marshall Brown, who actually went to Columbus and heard Allen's interview there in the library. But it came up, in June here at Reid, we study a book, and over 4 or 5 weeks, various people in the church, teach parts of the book, and so we did Theo this year. But Marshall wants to know, what's the magic moment for you in the book?
I would have to say, Marshall, honestly, there were a lot of moments that I would describe as magical. To me, the dramatic high point of the book, and this isn't everyone's, I'm sure, but it's when Kendrick and the district attorney have the conversation about sentencing the little Guatemalan man. To me, that was like the Greek chorus making the pronouncement. Mr. DA, you never looked at my face. You never recognized my humanity. And if there's something about Theo that is the distinctive, it's that he recognized the humanity in everyone that he encountered. That's like Jesus. Jesus recognized the humanity of the Pharisees, and he recognized the humanity of the harlot. Theo was like that. And I think that in that moment when Kendrick and the DA are having the conversation, that theme, I hope, comes out really vividly. But I would also confess to you that there were lots and lots and lots of times while I was writing the book, and even when I was reading it after having read it several times, that I would just cry. And I think it's because so many of the scenes were reminiscent of moments in my own life or moments that I hope I will have in life. I've lost loved ones. Most of you have lost loved ones in your life probably. So the moment when Theo has to deal with his grief was a very real thing to me. The moment of nature capturing his heart and kind of rescuing him from his despair. I love creation. I love birds. I live on a big piece of acreage. There's a lot of open sky and green around me. But there were a lot of magic moments in the book for me. But I think as far as a thematic moment that's the high point, it's Kendrick and
You want
Derek.
to tell the true story about Kendrick's character when you were a judge?
Yeah, I can tell you a couple. First of all, this Kendrick, African-American young man, for about 20 years now, I've been attending an African-American church in my hometown. So Harris County, Georgia, where I live, is populated maybe 45,000 people, very sparsely populated, huge county geographically. There are not many opportunities for cross-cultural encounter. If I lived in Augusta, I'm sure that there are probably, different sectors of your community that would qualify as cross-cultural if you engaged with them. In Harris County, we don't have much of that. But years ago, I wrote a song about one of my neighbors. His name is Benjamin Floyd. He passed away. He was a friend of our family, and he lived about 2 miles to the east of me, and I was doing a project called People in My Town. It's 7 songs, and the CD was actually 3 or 4 minutes of people speaking, telling their stories, and then I would follow that with a song that I wrote about them, kind of out of their narrative. And one of them was Deacon Benjamin Floyd. And I asked Deacon Floyd at the end of our conversation, how do you know the Bible so well, given that you have just admitted to me you don't know how to read? And he said, well, since 1943, I've been going to Longstreet Baptist Church. And I said, well, where's Longstreet Baptist Church? And he told me where it was, and it's a building that I had driven by thousands of times and did not realize it was a functioning gathering place for the church. Amber, it's on 208 between my place and y'all's place. And so I said, well, could I come visit y'all sometime? And with that beautiful African-American rhetoric, he said, the doors of our church is built on welcome hinges. Whosoever shall may come. And so the next week I went and shocked him. And I've been going ever since. And so it has been a beautiful thing to engage with that part of my community with which previously I had been only vaguely acquainted with. And I love the people of the Longstreet Church. So there's that dimension. I have a heart for especially some of my elderly friends who have grown up through some really tough circumstances. But I also served as judge for a couple of years, the probate judge in Harris County. It's kind of the only full-time sitting court in the county. We handle misdemeanor criminal cases, traffic court, marriage permits, all sorts of miscellaneous things. One day I was in my office and the deputies brought a very, very, very small Guatemalan man to my office. And he was cuffed and he was shackled and he was terrified. And they said, Judge, we just picked up this man. He's not supposed to be here. We caught him on a traffic charge. And so I said, well, first of all, take the cuffs and the shackles off of him. And they did that. And in my office, I had a table, and I love to do business with criminal or civil matters in my office if I could. So this man sat down across the table from me, and I held his hands, and I told him, first of all, through an interpreter, do not be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you, but if you've broken a law, I've got to deal with that, and we will deal with that. I don't remember what the charge was. He had not hurt anyone, unlike the character in the story. But we disposed of the minor criminal matter there, and then, very typical of when I dealt with cases in that manner, I said, could you stay for a minute, and I'd just like to hear your story. And so we had a really beautiful conversation, and I said, well, and he told me, he said, this is my second time to come into the States. I said, well, why did you come back, knowing that you might be deported again? He said, well, my daughter has cancer. She and my wife live in Noonan, and there's no way I could leave my daughter and my wife. I just had to come back. And so we talked about that. In the original text of the book, I had his actual name. I could tell it to you right now. I wrote it in my prayer book, and I still pray for this gentleman. But I changed that at the 11th hour because I didn't want to jeopardize him in any way. But again, and I probably was not a good judge, in all honesty. Probably was on the soft side of justice, but as the story says, and this was an axiom that I kind of developed for myself while I was judge, bad mercy does not hurt nearly as badly as bad justice. If I have to err on the side of being merciful or just, I would always come down on the merciful side. And sometimes it was hard to know what was the right thing to do. But the little Guatemalan man is the only scene in the book that is actual, that I took that from a moment of life from my own experience. Does that make sense?
All right, this is a Freeman question.
Freeman question.
Being a pediatrician, tell me about Ellen when she had her baby and she was holding the baby and they took the baby away.
Yeah.
I cried a lot.
Yeah, me too. I'm probably not the one to answer that. I would say that any mother in the room is much more qualified to answer that question. But I know that things like that happened. When I was a lawyer, a lot of my practice dealt with adoption. And those can be very stressful, very emotional circumstances on both sides of the equation, birth mother or adoptive mother. I don't know, it just felt like the right thing. Any story, I think that grabs us because it makes us feel something. We can put facts and figures and that sort of thing, but I wanted this story to make people feel something deeply.
Got me.
Yeah, good. Good.
Yeah. All right. Any scenes that you cut out of the book that you regret cutting out?
There were a lot of scenes I cut. I don't remember many of them now. I think it's a tendency of first-time writers, maybe all-time writers, to write too much. We become very enamored of how well we do what we do. Brandy, I hope preachers aren't like that. But there were lots of scenes that I cut. There was one that I kind of fancy, and maybe I'll resurrect it at some point. Theo used to meet with a bunch of guys in New York City. They were called the Hudson River Consortium. And they would get together every week. And the only requirement for attendance at this group was to show up with a quote and or a question. And it was five men from various backgrounds, ethnicities, and Theo was kind of the common denominator that brought them all together. But I love some of the conversations that came out of that. And it was probably 40 or 50 pages of text. I had to cut that, but like I say, maybe one day it will see life again.
For those that didn't know, he's working on a sequel that he may or may not publish, just like Theo, but it's going to be Ellen of Golden, mm-hmm. And it's about Ellen, the character that's in the book. Here's a good one, I thought. To what extent was the finish of Theo of Golden in your head before you started writing, or did you only develop it as you were writing the book? It's a dramatic ending.
Yeah, thank you. That came pretty quickly. When I was in law practice, it was my standard operating procedure whenever I got a case. I was a litigator on the defense end most of the time, the bad end. But the first thing that I always did when I was preparing a case, like if it was going to be 2 years of discovery, within the first couple of months, I liked to write my closing argument to the jury. And this was not fiction. I mean, I had some factual basis for whatever I wrote. But I wanted to be able to write my argument and then develop discovery to support the argument. And so when I started the book, that logic kind of came back to mind. And one of the earliest scenes that I wrote was the closing of the book, because I wanted there to be some mystery, some surprise there at the end. And so as I was writing the book, there were times that I would drop clues in. You might or might not have picked them up the first time through. And there were some times that I had clues that just seemed too conspicuous, so I took them out toward the end. But yeah, I knew the end pretty early on.
Jane Howington, who probably taught over half the women and ladies in this room.
And who I love, incidentally.
Told me once, when she reads a book, she starts, gets a third or fourth way into the book, and then reads the ending, and then goes back and finishes it in the middle, which I could never do.
No, don't do that. Please don't ever do that.
All right. I think this came from Clay Stallworth. In all your interviews, are there any questions about the book that you wish people would ask you, but they never have?
Thank you, Clay.
That wasn't your question?
It may have been Scott's. It may have been Scott's. Incidentally, thank you folks that have led the discussion the last few weeks about Theo. Frankly, I'm honored that anybody has any questions about the book, because it means that they've read it, that they've engaged with the text, and there's a curiosity that that they bring to the conversation. I like all the questions that people ask. I'm honored by them. But there is one that is implied in every question but not directly asked, and that is, what was your hope for the book? And so for many years, I've been doing work as a songwriter. That's been the creative gift that I have made my livelihood with for over 20 years before my brother got sick. And some people say art exists for art's sake. There's a famous quote by Faulkner, which I cannot state verbatim, but he basically says, nothing should ever get in the way of your art. Your family, nothing should ever get in the way of your art. Art is supreme. I don't think that applies to me as a follower of Christ. I don't think that applies to any of us as followers of Christ. And so there are guardrails that I kind of always have in place as a songwriter, as a memoirist about my brother's life. I had an agenda. I wanted to accomplish something through that book, Olivia Town, and now through Theo, and hopefully going forward in other fiction. The guardrails that all of us have is the Great Command and the Great Commission. Those are the bookends of our existence. The Great Command in Matthew 22, the lawyer asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment in the law? And you know that they had the Mishnah, they had the books of the law. The Jewish people had lots and lots and lots of rules. And Jesus very quickly, apparently, said, love the Lord thy God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. That is a guardrail. If I chose to go the Faulknerian way of writing, I would disregard the guardrail and say, who cares? I can write anything I want. But this will not allow me to do that. Does what I write encourage a maturation of discipleship in the people who will read what I write? Or will your work in insurance or teaching or pastoring or medicine, will that facilitate the maturation and the growth of disciples in your community? You are bound by that guardrail if you're a follower of Christ just like I am. The other is the Great Commission in Matthew 28, where Jesus says, go and teach the people to obey what I've taught you. The Great Commission. And so as I'm writing Theo, I'm thinking, does this book serve the bookends? And consistently while I was writing, you know, I pray a bunch when I write. God, please guide my pen. And as I wrote, I was thinking, Lord, I'm entrusting this to you, but I think I'm doing that. Now, some people would say, well, you know, I don't know. There's not much gospel in your book. And the truth is, maybe not. You know, not overt gospel. But I would confess to you that even as a songwriter, I always felt like God wanted me to cast as broad a net as I possibly could. And maybe what I have tried to do musically and even in Theo is what some would term pre-evangelistic. And my strategy when I was writing this book was I want to give about 300 pages to development of a character who people will love, regardless of where they are on the religious spectrum, political spectrum, socio-economic spectrum. Create a character that people are drawn to. And then at the end, tip my hand just a little bit. What makes this man the way that he is? And so with the eulogy, the pastor, Father Lundy, has a chance to talk a little bit about Theo's life in that vein. So that's a guardrail. And one of the hopes that I have as I wrote the book was that this would serve the kingdom of God, that it would be an extension of the church and the pulpit ministry and what all of us do in our day-to-day life in the marketplace. Another thing that I try to keep in mind is always remember the audience. Who am I writing to? And there's two dimensions to that. The first, of course, is the human audience. I didn't want anybody at the end of 40 pages to put it down because they would say, oh, this is a book about Jesus. This is one of those. So I'm not going to read it anymore. I was very sensitive to that fact. I was sensitive to the fact that I'm not writing this to the church per se. I hope it will bless the church. But I want to write this for my friends who are very far from Christ. But the second audience, and the one that's most important, is him. When I left law practice years ago to do music, a friend of mine said, Alan, she knew I would be making my living in front of audiences, with which I will admit to you this morning, I am always uncomfortable. But she said, always remember the most important thing is the applause of the nail-scarred hands. And she said, if everybody in the room applauds, but you don't hear that applause, then you have thrown away an opportunity. If nobody in the room applauds, but you feel like you have been faithful to your call, then you have succeeded. And so that has been another guardrail that's really helpful to me, a commitment to excellence. I was doing a podcast recently. Brandy, I don't know if you know Colin Hansen or the Gospel Coalition. Really brainy guy and wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man. But he and I were doing a podcast, and he was asking some questions, and Daryl, 3 times he used the phrase Christian book. And finally I said, hey, Colin, I'm going to push back a little bit on that. When I was a lawyer, sometimes people would come to me and they would say, I understand you're a Christian. And I would say, yeah, I'm a Christian. In the back of my mind, I didn't really know what that meant. And I always interpreted that very generously and charitably. But what I really wanted people to say was, the reason that I came to your office is because I heard you're a good lawyer. And what I would like is for somebody to say, hey, I heard this is a good book. And then they read it, and we get to shine a little light on the gospel through it. So remembering the audience is real important. I'd live with a healthy fear, and I would caution all of us to do this, a healthy fear of misusing words. The media does it consistently. It's their tool in trade, misused words, conversation, gossip, words that are mean-spirited or bigoted. The scripture is so emphatic on the potential of words. The power of life and death is in the tongue. In other words, words, our speech, the things that we say and write. In Matthew 12:36, there is a verse that haunts me. And I think it probably ought to haunt all of us a little bit. Jesus says, on the day of judgment, you will be judged for every careless word that you spoke. And so as a writer, you know, there's not a bad word in this book. But let me just say this. The footnote to that is that in the same sense that words can be used in a way that's malicious or destructive or detrimental, there is the hopeful, the joyful possibility that words rightly used can change the world for the better. So Brandy will speak this morning. She will bring to us the Word of God. And the hope that God will use those words to draw us closer to Himself and closer to one another and make us more able to fulfill the Great Command and the Great Commission ought to really give a lot of us incentive this week to be careful with our words, but to use them in a way that is loud and proud if we're doing it the right way.
Yeah, my wife will vouch for it, and the people that sit around me in the pews. I can't sing, I can't dance, I can't play a musical instrument.
You make good pancakes, though.
I make good pancakes. But I love listening to songs. And one of the great Allen Levi quotes from some song, we need a lot more gospel and a little less church.
Yeah.
And we do need that.
I got a letter last week. In fact, one of the byproducts of this, again, has been letters that I receive from time to time. I got one from a woman in Nevada, and a very long letter, and she's really, really talented as a writer, but at the end she said, I left Catholicism many years ago, and I left Christianity many years ago, but I really liked your book and just the Christian tone of the main character. And I wrote her back and I said, I can kind of understand leaving the isms and the anities, but I can't see leaving Jesus. And I hope that you will find your way to Him. And so I hope there'll be some correspondence with me and her going forward.
And I recommend highly to the audience, if you go to YouTube and Google Allen Levi Columbus Library, there's about an hour-long interview. And one of the most intriguing comments he makes in that one is somebody asking, why do you follow Christ after all these years?
Yeah, that was a crazy question, wasn't it? This was a public forum, and Columbus being my hometown, I know a lot of the people who were there that night. And that was one of the questions. It had nothing to do with the text, but I just happened to have read John 6 not long before that. Y'all know the story. Jesus and his friends are with a multitude of people, and Jesus is, he delivers a message which is pretty hard, and everybody leaves except his buddies. And he turned to his friends and he said, hey, if y'all want to go, you can go too. And their answer was, where would we go? And that was my answer to the question that night. But it kind of opened the door. And I did give a disclaimer before I answered the question. I said, please, that is not a staged question. This is not a setup. This is not a bait and switch. I came to talk about the book. But I will answer that question as honestly as I can because I think y'all are grown up enough to receive it. And so gave the answer, but had some great opportunity to talk about my faith.
We probably got time for one burning question from the audience, but just a reminder, after church, Allen will be available to sign books, autograph books. Joy, are we completely out of books?
We have 4 left.
We have 4 book hardback copies left for sale if anybody needs one. And where are we going to do the book signing? In the atrium out there, where there will be cookies and lemonade, etc. Okay. All right. Who's got the burning question?
I have one question.
I'll repeat it.
After study in Scotland, I read author George MacDonald 50 years ago. I've read all of his books. Wondered if that had an influence in your writing.
So is George MacDonald a Scottish author?
Yeah.
Okay. He want to know if his writings had any influence.
Yeah, I got it.
All right.
So, yes, I had been in law practice 10 years at that point, and I thought I might like to be a professor someday. When I was a student in Athens, I was not a follower of Christ until my senior year, and I had a course in Southern fiction taught by Jim Kilgo and the poetry of Milton taught by George Martin, who ended up at Wofford. And those courses actually kind of helped me find my way into the kingdom. And I thought it would be great to be a college professor. Well, about, I don't know, a few years after that, I discovered George MacDonald. And I too have read most everything that I could get my hands on. So I had traveled to Scotland previously. And so I thought I'm going to go back and stay there for a couple of years. I enrolled at the University of Edinburgh. And I studied Scottish fiction 1800 to 1940, which included George MacDonald. But he is so poorly thought of in Scotland, he was not even on the reading list. But I asked my professor, would you help me read through everything that George MacDonald has written? And so I had the original Scotch renderings of the books and read a lot about George MacDonald. He had a huge influence on T.S. Eliot, C.S. Lewis, Dorothy Sayers, lots of very well-known authors. I went and spent a day in his home, his childhood home, and met the people who live there now and did a lot of research on MacDonald while I was there and was admitted into the PhD program to do a thesis on MacDonald. But it was going to take 5 years or so to do it, and I just didn't have the stamina for it. But don't you love George MacDonald? Yeah. Thank you for that question. Hey, thank y'all for letting me be here this morning.
Yeah, come here. You close us out.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank y'all and blessings to you. You've got a wonderful city here. Remember every day that you go out that you are the face of Christ to people. Look people in the eyes, learn their names, be generous, do it as anonymously as you possibly can, but give, and continue doing the good work that you're doing. I'm honored that y'all let me be with you this morning. So thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.